Owning a golf course sounds like the ultimate rich person fantasy. Rolling green fairways with your name on the clubhouse, members tipping their hats to you at the pro shop, maybe a helicopter pad if you're feeling ambitious. Here's the part nobody puts in that fantasy. Most golf courses in America either lose money or barely limp across break-even most years. So why do wealthy people keep buying them anyway? That contradiction is the whole video. And by the end of it, you're going to understand exactly what's really being bought when someone buys a golf course, because it usually isn't what you think. I'm Chris. This is P&L Files, and we break down the real numbers behind businesses everyone thinks they understand, until you actually look at the filing. And golf courses are a perfect test case for that, because almost everyone has an opinion on whether they're a good investment, and almost nobody has actually run the numbers on what one costs to build, what it costs to keep alive, and where the actual profit, when there is any, is genuinely coming from. Before construction even starts, there's the cost of the land itself, and this is where a lot of first-time owners get their first shock. Prime acreage large enough and flat enough to shape into 18 holes, especially anywhere near a growing suburb or a resort market, routinely costs millions of dollars to acquire outright, or a substantial recurring lease payment if the land is rented rather than bought. And either way, that cost is separate from, and on top of, everything it takes to actually build the course on it. Let's start with what it actually costs to build one of these things from bare dirt. A full 18-hole golf course typically runs somewhere between $5 million and $15 million to construct, and on the high end, think dramatic water features, imported turf, a resort-grade layout, that number can climb past $40 million before you've sold a single round. Break that down and you'll see where the money actually goes. Shaping the holes themselves, the fairways, greens, tee boxes, drainage, and basic landscaping typically runs somewhere between $110,000 and almost $400,000 per hole, and on 18 holes, that adds up fast on its own. Then there's irrigation, and this is the part people always underestimate. A comprehensive system to keep that much turf alive across an entire property can run anywhere from $750,000 to $2.5 million by itself. Add drainage work on top of that, another $500,000 to $1.5 million, and you're looking at tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure before the clubhouse, the cart fleet, or the maintenance equipment even enter the conversation. And once it's built, the bills don't stop. Turf care and water alone can eat up something like 2/3 of a golf course's entire revenue in variable operating costs. Mowing, fertilizing, aerating, watering a property that in some climates needs irrigation, running literally every single day it's not raining. Add a maintenance crew, a pro shop staff, a food and beverage operation, insurance, and property taxes on top of that, and you've got a business with genuinely brutal fixed costs that keep coming whether 10 people play that day or 200 do. Now here's the number that really puts this business in perspective. How much land this thing actually eats up. A standard 18-hole golf course sits on somewhere around 150 acres of land, in a lot of cases prime, well-located acreage close enough to a city or a resort destination to be worth developing something else on entirely. Run the revenue those 150 acres generate per acre, per year, and compare it to almost any other use of that same land, a shopping center, an office park, or, as we're about to get into, actual housing, and golf is one of the single least efficient uses of land, dollar for dollar, in the entire real estate industry. You are tying up an enormous, expensive footprint of land to generate revenue that, acre for acre, most other commercial or residential development would blow out of the water. Picture a composite version of a mid-market 18-hole course to make this concrete. Call it $10 million to build, roughly $4 million on shaping the holes themselves, $1.5 million on irrigation, $1 million on drainage, and the rest split across a modest clubhouse, a maintenance facility, and a cart fleet. Finance a chunk of that $10 million with a loan, and before a single golfer has paid a single green fee, the owner is already carrying real annual debt service on top of the turf and water costs, eating up something like 2/3 of whatever revenue does come in. That's the financial hole this business starts in, on day one, on a good piece of land, before weather, participation trends, or anything else even enters the picture. So if the construction bill is enormous, the ongoing costs are brutal, and the land itself is being used about as inefficiently as possible, how does anyone make real money doing this? Here's the twist, and it's the actual core of this entire video. For a huge number of golf course owners, the golf course itself was never really the profit center. The real money is in what gets built around it. Walk through the actual revenue mix on a typical course first, because it matters. Greens fees, what a golfer pays to play a single round, are the most visible revenue line, but at most courses, they're nowhere near enough on their own to cover the costs we just walked through. Membership dues, at private clubs, provide a steadier, more predictable base, essentially prepaying for access whether or not that member plays every week. Cart rentals, the pro shop selling clubs and apparel, and food and beverage at the clubhouse all add layers on top, and at some clubs, food and beverage alone can be a bigger profit contributor than the golf operation itself, because restaurant and bar margins are simply better than green fee margins ever will be. Think about why that's true for a second, because it's not a small detail. A green fee has to cover hours of mowing, watering, and staffing an entire 150-acre property before a single dollar is profit. A banquet hall booked for a Saturday wedding reception, or a clubhouse bar running a Sunday brunch crowd after the morning tea times clear out, carries almost none of that overhead. The grass was going to be mowed either way. That's why plenty of clubs have quietly become event venues and restaurants that happen to have 18 holes attached, rather than golf courses that happen to serve food. But the real money, increasingly, is a few hundred yards away from the fairway entirely. Homes built around a golf course sell at a real, measurable premium. Properties with a golf course view or direct fairway access have historically sold for somewhere around 15% more than an equivalent home without one. Fairway front lots in newer developments are listing anywhere from $1.1 million to nearly $2 million each, purely for the privilege of backing up to a golf course. Multiply that premium across dozens or hundreds of home sites ringing an 18-hole layout, and you start to see the actual business model. The golf course itself can run at a loss, or barely break even, for years, because it was never the product. It was the amenity that made every single home around it worth measurably more. Nearly half of all golf course projects currently under construction or in planning, something like 42%, include a housing component baked directly into the design, compared to only about a quarter of existing golf courses built that way historically. That's not a coincidence. That's the industry openly admitting where the actual profit has moved. This isn't actually a new discovery either. Golf course communities as a real estate strategy go back to the boom years of the 80s and 90s, when developers realized that laying out a golf course first, then selling home lots around its perimeter, let them charge a premium for literally every single lot touching a fairway, without needing the course itself to ever turn a real profit. Some of those same developers openly treated the course as a marketing expense, budgeted the same way you'd budget for a sales office or a set of show homes, a cost of doing the real business, which was selling the houses. And you can see the mechanism just as clearly in reverse. When a golf course in Florida closed down entirely, homeowners around it reported an immediate drop of about $20 per square foot in their property values, practically overnight, from one specific, local cause. That's not a golf story. That's a real estate story wearing a golf costume, and it tells you exactly what the fairway was actually worth to the people who bought houses next to it, and to the developer who built and sold those houses in the first place. The grass didn't change, the greens didn't change. The moment the course stopped existing as a backdrop, real, measurable dollars evaporated off the value of hundreds of unrelated properties around it. So why, if there's a real business model buried in here, do margins on the golf operation itself stay so brutally thin for so many owners? Start with seasonality. Most courses outside of the Sun Belt are only fully operational for 6 to 8 months a year, and every fixed cost we talked about earlier, the crew, the insurance, the equipment loans, keeps accruing during the months nobody's playing at all. Layer weather dependency on top of seasonality, and you get a business where a single rainy month in the middle of peak season can wipe out a meaningful chunk of an entire year's targeted revenue with zero ability to make up those lost rounds later. You can't sell yesterday's unplayed tee time today, the same way an empty hotel room or an empty airline seat can never be resold once the moment passes. Run the actual math on that seasonality problem. A course that's fully playable for, say, 7 months a year is still paying 12 months of insurance, 12 months of loan payments, and in colder climates, a skeleton crew through winter just to keep the property from falling apart before spring. That means the entire year's revenue has to get generated in roughly half the calendar, while the costs get spread across the whole thing, which is exactly why a single washed-out July weekend, historically one of the highest demand stretches of the year, can do disproportionate damage to an annual budget that a similar bad weekend in a year-round business, like a restaurant, simply wouldn't cause. Then there's the participation trend itself, and this is a more complicated story than most people assume. Golf boomed through the Tiger Woods era in the 90s, then plateaued, then went through a genuinely brutal stretch. Between 2003 and 2018, the sport lost close to 7 million players and saw more than 1,200 course closures nationwide, largely correcting for a wave of nearly 5,000 new courses built during the boom years that the market never actually needed. That's the environment a lot of these golf plus real estate developments were originally built into: shrinking demand, oversupply, and courses closing faster than new ones opened. Then the pandemic hit, and weirdly, golf did something almost no other in-person leisure activity did. It got a genuine, lasting boost. Rounds played actually dropped sharply in the first few months of lockdown, down over 40% year over year in April of 2020 alone, but by 2021, total rounds played nationwide crossed 500 million for the first time since before the 2008 financial crisis, and the growth didn't stop when the world reopened. Recent years have set repeated participation records, with total rounds running something like 21% above the pre-pandemic 5-year average, and beginner golfers, brand new players picking up the sport for the first time, have stayed above 3 million a year since 2020, compared to roughly 2.5 million a year in the stretch right before. So the honest, complicated answer is that this industry spent nearly 2 decades correcting for genuine oversupply and shrinking demand, and then got an unexpected demand shock that's still playing out in a way nobody fully predicted in 2019. Add in one more brutal, unavoidable cost: labor. A golf course, unlike almost any other piece of commercial real estate, requires constant, skilled, physical maintenance across a massive footprint. Every single day, the grass is growing, rain or shine, high season or low. That crew cost doesn't scale down cleanly just because fewer people played that week. It's one of the most labor-intensive maintenance profiles of any business built on this much land, and it's a cost that shows up on the books whether the course is busy or nearly empty. So who actually makes real money running one of these things? It depends enormously on which version of this business you're actually running. Municipal, publicly owned courses generally aren't built to maximize profit in the first place. Plenty of towns run them as a community amenity, accepting break-even or modest losses as the cost of offering affordable recreation, the same logic a city applies to a public pool or a park. Private country clubs sit at the opposite end. They generate revenue primarily through fixed membership dues rather than pay-per-round green fees, which is a fundamentally lower-risk model as long as the club has enough paying members to cover its costs. And in major metro areas, a well-run private club can generate something like 5 times the revenue of a comparable municipal course, because it's charging a small membership base a premium instead of charging a large public base a modest green fee. That 5 times gap is worth sitting with for a second, because it's not that private clubs are 5 times better run, it's that the entire risk structure is different. A public course needs a large volume of individually modest green fee transactions to add up, which means a slow month, a rainy stretch, or a nearby competitor undercutting on price shows up immediately in the bank account. A private club collects a big chunk of its annual revenue up front, from members who already committed months or years earlier, largely independent of how many of them actually show up to play on any given Tuesday. One model gets paid per visit, the other gets paid whether people visit or not, and that difference alone explains a huge share of the profitability gap between the two. Resort courses run differently still, bundling golf into a broader vacation and hospitality experience where the round itself is almost a loss leader for room nights, spa visits, and dinner reservations. Put a failing model and a thriving model side by side, and the difference becomes obvious. A standalone, aging public course built during the 80s boom, with no surrounding development, competing against 3 other courses within 20 minutes, charging green fees that haven't kept pace with rising maintenance costs, is the textbook example of the business that eventually sells to a home builder. Now put next to it a private club anchoring a modern residential community, where the operating company doesn't actually need the course to profit on its own, because the developer's real return already showed up years earlier in the premium charged on every single fairway-adjacent lot, and what's left is just an amenity fund, subsidized happily, forever, because it's protecting the value of every home in the neighborhood. Same sport, same grass, completely different business underneath it. And here's a genuinely honest wrinkle in the doom and gloom version of this story that a lot of golf coverage skips entirely. As of the most recent industry survey data, only around 14% of private clubs and 8% of public courses reported real financial struggles. That means the overwhelming majority of golf courses in this country, across both major ownership models, are reporting themselves to be in reasonably healthy financial shape right now. Not thriving necessarily, but not the mass failure story the golf is dying narrative from the 2010s would have led you to expect. The industry that was closing courses by the hundreds a decade ago has, at least for now, stabilized, helped enormously by that unexpected pandemic-era demand. Which brings it all together. A struggling course sitting on valuable land near a growing suburb is often worth dramatically more to its owner closed and redeveloped into housing than it ever was open and operating, which is exactly why so many marginal courses over the past 2 decades didn't get rescued by a better business plan. They simply got sold, bulldozed, and replaced with cul-de-sacs. Meanwhile, a course that's still open, still central to a thriving housing development, is often being deliberately kept alive at break-even or worse, specifically because it's propping up hundreds of home values around it. Home values that, in aggregate, are worth far more to the owner than the golf operation's own profit and loss statement will ever show on its own. So here's the actual shape of the golf course business, once you see all of it laid out together. The construction bill is enormous. The maintenance costs are brutal and constant. The land itself is used about as inefficiently as commercial real estate gets, and the golf operation on its own frequently loses money or barely breaks even, season after season. And for a real share of the owners in this industry, that was never actually the point. The golf course was the amenity. The real estate wrapped around it was always the product. Green fees are a rounding error next to what a golf course view adds to 400 home sale prices. Understand that, and the rich person's money-losing hobby starts looking a lot more like one of the more quietly disciplined real estate plays in the entire industry, wearing a recreation business as its costume. One more honest caveat before we close, because it would be too tidy to end there. Not every golf course is secretly a real estate play, and plenty of standalone public courses with no housing attached genuinely do just try to make money mowing grass and selling tee times year after year with no hidden real estate angle at all. Some of those succeed, especially in growing Sunbelt markets with long playing seasons and thin competition. Plenty of others are exactly as financially fragile as the "golf is a money pit" reputation suggests. The real estate model is common enough and lucrative enough that it deserves to be the headline of this story. But it isn't the only story in an industry this large and this regionally varied. That's P&L Files. Real numbers, no guesswork, every single time. If you want to actually understand how a business works, instead of just repeating what everyone assumes about it, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.